Let's get started. Yay! Bienvenidos a todos. Feliz jueves. My name is Andrea Martinez. I use she, her pronouns. I am the president of this non-hierarchical student organization, the GW Urban Studies Initiative. We did our kind of more formal intro and land and labor acknowledgement at our kickoff, but I will recapitulate a little bit. We are an education and advocacy org at the George Washington University. We mostly do these kinds of community knowledge shares, and we use the city as a jumping off point to consider kind of how principles of hegemony persist into our spaces today. For context about GW, it still calls its athletes colonials. And up until last year, our student center was named after a man who cleared Black family neighborhoods to expand our campus into Foggy Bottom, which is ancestral unceded indigenous land of Piscataway and Nakotchunk tribes. One personal note, I am the daughter of Venezuelan immigrants, and I feel it behooves me to name that GW is the landlord to the International Monetary Fund's headquarters. So just to name where we stand. As I mentioned, I am the president of this org. I'm also a senior American Studies major. I'd like to give us 2 guideposts and a nudge. That's my note on my little itinerary. 2 guideposts and a nudge. A nudge, I'll start with first. In this event, of course, is free. Tickets are free because information should be free, but we do ask that if you are able to, you contribute maybe what you would have paid for a ticket to Ward 3 Mutual Aid. We've put their info on our Eventbrite. Let me drop that in the chat real quick. tinyurl.com/city. The people. Which is the name of this 2nd annual symposium by the GW Urban Studies Initiative. So that's my nudge. My guideposts, as I was telling MJ just now, I want y'all to be a little confused. I want y'all to be a little confused because I think A, that means your brain is working in a new way. And B, if you're anything like me, you will experience something and then like 72 hours after the fact, it will make sense or you'll process it. And so I'm hoping that something like that brain blast happens. You'll get the information now and then maybe on Saturday or Sunday, you'll be like, oh, whoa, I have a new thought. And then you can email. I'll put that in the chat as well. You can email urbanstudiesgw@gmail.com and you can tell me all about it. Which would be delightful. I'd love to keep the conversation going. That's my one guidepost. My second guidepost is that in the same vein, I think this is billed on the Eventbrite as somewhat of like a Q&A. That's a misnomer. I want this to be more of like a conversation. So these questions will be a little bit verbose. I'll pop them in the chat. I won't screen share because that distracts me, but I will put them in the chat. And I just want us to grapple with each question in the context that it was generated from to the best of my ability. So I want to kind of like triangulate our brains. So sorry, no worries. I want us to triangulate our brains to live in a particular place of proximity with deceptively unrelated ideas and let our neuronal plasticity do the work from there. Those are my guideposts. Get ready to be a little confused. That was my nudge. Please send what you can to Ward 3 Mutual Aid. And it is now a literal dream to pass off the floor to the esteemed MJ Corey of Kardashian Colloquium. If you can just introduce yourself, introduce the project, and maybe like some themes that you come back to in the work.
Yeah, thank you. That was such a great way to start. I love the encouragement of neuroplasticity. That's always the dream for sure. It just feels good to be generative with people. And that is really kind of what drives my interest in the Kardashians, and kind of playing a role of like a bridge between the highbrow and the more everyday of pop media. I run Kardashian Colloquium. I am a writer. I'm also by day a psychotherapist, but under my real name, MJ Corey is a pen name. And I've been running Kardashian Colloquium since 2018 on Instagram. I got on TikTok during the pandemic. That's been an interesting experience. And that's been kind of broadening my project, which is an interesting thing to talk about too, in terms of space and different platforms and how they become spaces in a way. And TikTok is much broader and more like an ocean of content. So lots for us to get into together.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of, I mean, I'm not on TikTok because I'm decidedly millennial.
Yep.
And I also feel that if I were on TikTok, it would take up hours of my time. But that also brings up the kind of like fluidity between space and time, right? Like the way that I'm kind of scared to get that like, what's it called? Like your screen time report, because it makes you feel like, oh, well, if I spent 3 hours on this app, I was only spending 3 hours. It's like, you could have been on a walk, you could have like been cooking, you could have been cleaning, right? So it distorts the multivalency, I suppose, or like the multitasking aspect of that, which is interesting because like that's how they bill themselves. It's like, oh, you can be doing this, that, and like 3 other things at the same time. All right, to ground us in this conversation, I'm going to share some video clips from MJ's video essay, Theory and Content Creating in Las Vegas. Which iconic city is the Kardashian family? Let me just go ahead and share that. Now we'll watch 2 clips to kind of like give us some context for this conversation. Is that working for everyone? Can you see the screen?
Oh yeah. Oh, I can.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, cool.
I'll mute myself while you play it. Sorry.
No worries. All right, so we'll watch 2 clips and then we'll jump into it.
Of architectural phases. As we know from California, phasic development is the name of Kim's game. But what makes Vegas a little different from California through a Kim context is that Vegas's architectural evolution can be likened to the surgical creation of her literal body. Kim's entire body has been an architectural project unto itself. Her body tells stories of Black appropriation, formulas of symmetry, technological advancement, and sheer spectacle. It outrages us, titillates us, and sells to us. We watch it to see how it'll transform next. Just as Kim's body defines her brand, the casinos of Vegas make the city what it is, and the world watches for what story the next massive Vegas development might tell. Fortune Hotels, Las Vegas.
All right, so that's just to introduce kind of a plasticity, as we were saying, between like bodies and architecture. And we'll watch, where are we, 57, another clip here-ish. There we go.
Mirage, which offered a massive interior jungle with real palm trees and orchids, but over 20,000 feet of fake plants. Apparently, the Mirage's interior designer said that this exhibition enabled guests to have the experience of walking through a jungle without the heat and mosquitoes. And the benefit of mixing real and fake was that people are trying to figure out which is real. This makes me think about the entire philosophy of Keeping Up with the Kardashians, a very precise balance of real and staged. In running my social media account about the family, I've learned that one of the main aspects of their project that engages viewers is the constant quest to identify what drama felt real and which actions were staged.
I am the creator and writer of a column called Keeping Up with the Continuity Errors. And if you don't know what continuity is, it's I'm tracking all of the times the Kardashians have misled us about when certain scenes were filmed or what order or what stories are real or fake, basically.
The Excalibur Castle was inspired by the popularity of the Disney castle, but was offensive to many traditional architects because of its exaggerated proportions. Instead of studying the actual interiors of real castles, its designers imitated movie set depictions of castles. The entire hotel casino was designed according to the theory that we recognize caricatures more easily than the real object they represent, since the brain works by exaggerating difference. The Kardashians, behaving in over-the-top ways on their show and building out extreme bodies to be photographed for the media, seem to have this effect as well. We make opinions based on storylines we realize were likely staged because the story got through to us potentially even more clearly due to its absurd exaggeration. What I mean is, audiences don't have the patience to watch for nuance in their TV programming and instead readily grasp on to more obvious narratives. As Stefan Al quoted of Walt Disney, all characters in fables must be caricatures, exaggerations. It is the very nature of fantasy and fable. Or even how, when corporate gaming laws were lifted, Vegas went corporate and
We'll stop there, even though I don't want to, but also sorry if you can hear the sirens, but that's DC for you. Yeah, so I just wanted to play us those two clips, obviously, as I mentioned in the first one, to introduce that plasticity between bodies and architecture. And that second one was so fascinating to me because the idea that our brains are working in those half steps where we're constantly only referencing the simulacra, I guess, and kind of like it makes you wonder about how much longer can that go before it becomes this, like, it's so hollow that it crumbles in on itself, basically. Which we'll get into that in our conversation, but let me just give y'all a little bit of context as to why I was inspired to approach cities in the context of pop media. We were discussing this a little bit before, but I walk around DC a lot listening to pop music. I've lived in the same very like commercial area of DC for so long that it's gained this kind of like dreamlike aspect, like the same streets that I was walking when I was like 19 or 20, I'm walking when I'm 25. And I'm like, it's wild to me that sometimes I'll be listening to a good pop song and it will still feel new. All of that will still feel new. And so I'm wondering how pop media can hold all that we were and still have room for all that we are, pop media and lowbrow media in general. I'm wondering how cities support main character energy. And I'm wondering how we can leverage that kind of like gripping affective relationship we have to that like combined presence of pop media and cities to make them more just, to make them more equitable. We'll get into the concept of arcology, which is cities in the image of man. And so how can we make it truly in the image of an every person that is really, it's healthy for everyone involved. I think both cities and pop media share a kind of balance between rigidity and liquidity, or kind of like formulaicness and variation. Like you've got your standard 3 minute 30 pop song. You've got in the Kardashians this very deep rooted tradition of the perfect story arc. But you've also got, as I mentioned, like this newness, this fluidity, this ongoingness, this change. Like it depends on what's going on in your life, which pop song is just going to hit. The Kardashians' bodies are mimicking a culturally appropriated aesthetic, but they're moving forward with whichever aesthetic is like on vogue right now. And so I'm wondering like how cities act in that similar kind of like fixed and fluid way, again, like how that intersects with main character energy, and how, again, to really underscore like how we can leverage all of these understandings to make them more equitable spaces. So with that.
Awesome questions. I'm gonna like think out loud.
Please.
We're gonna like be in this together because so the Kardashians are main characters of their own stories.
Yes.
The Kardashians are also masters of publicity. Publicity is very entwined with nostalgia. They feed each other. John Berger writes a lot about that in Ways of Seeing, that just images of the past we kind of like reappropriate into the present and into visions of the future. So right. There's like kind of an iconography made of a moment. For example, Legally Blonde. We were talking about Legally Blonde before this convo started, and the epic moment of Elle Woods having, you know, her victory. That has become iconic. Now it's almost a piece of nostalgia, and we can reappropriate that feeling in moments that feel applicable to our lives, but it's pop media for everybody, and then we kind of make it ours. There's something about publicity, these iconic figures, the way they narrate their lives, make myths of their lives, and there's science and history behind that we can get to. And then the surveillance piece, the self-awareness piece, and cities like Vegas, cities or situations like Disneyland, which are actually really like, you know, exemplars of the construction of a city, are great places for that. You feel like a main character when you're in Las Vegas. And my whole argument, of course, as everyone saw, is that the Kardashians are Las Vegas. So there's something around social media or media in general. We'll use the Kardashians, but pop culture, and then our own experience in space and time, and then surveillance too. And there's a lot of surveillance in Disney, and there's a lot of surveillance in Vegas, and then in our worlds, period. So I guess that's my like putting it out there for now answer, but we can get nitty-gritty together.
Yeah, no, the surveillance aspect of it, living in DC, this I have a question about that. I'll jump out of order.
It's just totally.
Okay. I will backtrack. I will say DC is the most surveilled city in the world. And so I've written a paper about this, I think. It's wild to me that I can be walking down past the White House and I'll be being watched by God knows how many forms of the state police. But I'll have my headphones on and they don't, as far as I know, they don't know what I'm listening to. Right. So you can be in this super public, super like hyper visible and punitive space. And there's this nugget of like, but I still have myself. I still have my main character energy. I don't know, maybe they are listening, who knows? And then maybe they're enjoying the bangers, who knows? But yeah, unfortunately, we couldn't get to kind of the comparisons between, or the contrast between Las Vegas, New York, LA. And so I'm wondering if you can give us kind of some insight into how the Kardashians like are specifically Las Vegas and not so strongly New York or LA, both in terms of their bodies and their like familial or interpersonal relationships.
Yeah, I love that question. Because in the video essay, I'm very proud of the video essay, especially the way my sister and I like whipped it up in like a month, but we didn't. Yeah, we just pulled it together. I made it with my sister, who's a producer and an editor. And New York, there's more I kind of wish I'd said, and I might like be like, you guys heard it here first. Like, I'm sharing theories. I didn't want to like, I didn't have time to like really get into the video essay, but they are the most Vegas for reasons we'll probably explore in this conversation. I would say they still are Los Angeles, but it's just not as much Vegas. Like in terms of LA, I think they're really fitting because LA is a highway city. It's a very spread out city. It's also a relatively new city. It's a collection of villages. There's a lot of ways to compare the Kardashians to LA. The cultural appropriation, the fact that Hollywood kind of like happened in LA because California's terrain was so like amenable to different kinds of appropriation, like that I referenced in the video essay. Another kind of video essay called Los Angeles Plays Itself, and it's about Hollywood's depictions of Los Angeles. And we learned that Calabasas, the home of the Kardashians, was used to be China in some like old Hollywood film. So there's like actually kind of like a parallel of cultural appropriation, just using the terrain of California. So in a lot of ways, the Kardashians are LA, but I just feel like they're much more Vegas. And then for New York, well, I'll stay with LA for a second. The other thing that makes them very LA to me is the fact that it's a highway city. So it's a freeway city. So the connectivity is through freeways, which displaced the actual train system that they were building, which the movie Who Framed Roger Rabbit is apparently an allegory for the elimination of like the train systems. You might find this interesting doing urban studies, everyone here. Apparently Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which is a very interesting movie that collides cartoons with the real world. So Lacquer stuff is actually just about like the displacement and the private profit drive to bring in highways and what that would mean for the for cars basically, and the whole like industry of cars. So now it's a highway city, and there's something about the metaphor between the network society we live in, social media, which the Kardashians have completely colonized, and freeways as an information superhighway. So in that sense, they're very LA to me, because you get around in LA by freeways. Oh, someone has an interesting thought. The highways racially segregate the city. Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
I
Love
like
that people
that,
are
yeah.
jumping in. Yes. So I forgot the question.
No, it's okay. It's Las Vegas versus LA, New York.
Yes,
You were
yes.
about to jump into New York.
Thank you. Yes, great guidance. Okay, so New York there are freeways around New York, but it's not a freeway city. So
Yeah.
what I get into in the video essay is the Kardashians, a lot of New Yorkers, I've heard people joke like they would never make it here. And there's like, there's that kind of like that sense of New Yorker superiority that I think a lot of us have, which is something that we should probably check. But I would say the theoretical kind of way to look at that is that it's subway systems. It's much more efficient. People are connecting more, or at least pre-pandemic, person to person. Like the human contact is one of the most beautiful organic aspects of New York and city living. And that's, stereotypically, but also just conceptually not as much the case in LA in terms of transportation getting around. So the Kardashians are better suited to LA because if you're using like a social media or like technology metaphor, they're meant for the highways, transmitting information through the channel of social media. New York, I guess in this viewpoint, is sort of more organic, more like material, more person to person. And the Kardashians are not as well suited, I think, to interpersonal real life interactions. I've heard when people meet Kim, they're like, she's really like, everyone has the same takeaway about meeting Kim, which is she's actually really nice and down to earth in person, but the perfection of that is its own commodity. Like everyone has the same takeaway. So
yeah. Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Wow.
That
does make me think, and this is totally a tangent, but that does make me think about like how Pete Davidson factors into this whole thing, because he's, so off the cuff that it's like, how does that, to say nothing even, I think like it's been really interesting to see that there's been very little, at least as I've seen, very little about the like age politics of it. Like it's just, folks just seem to accept that this is, it is its own little sphere of ethics. I did want to add, this is also off order, but you brought something up about kind of like how they are more suited to this distance aspect, or to bring the city's aspect into it, the freeways. What I've been thinking about though is like, the Kardashians really have no say about what posts they appear next to. Like you could be scrolling and you could get like a post from Chloe, a post from Kim, and then you'd have like a dumbass meme page. And then you'd have maybe like a traumatic news event. And then you have like something, it's like a third grade friend posts, right? Like it's the chaotic nature of social media, but like, it's really interesting to consider in terms of like, they are so hyper constructed that like, it's still that final mile that they don't have any control over. They don't have any say over like, no, you're going to fix the algorithm, or maybe they do, but like, as far as we know, they have no say over like, you're going to fix this algorithm so that like our posts appear in like next to equally seamlessly kind of constructed aesthetics. So what are possible comparisons here? So like with California, we're saying like, it has this malleability in its aesthetics. I was really struck by there's a quote in the essay that's like, California is desirable because it can play any place but itself, which there's a whole lot going on there. So that also makes me think of migration. You spoke a little bit in the video essay about how California is, its neighborhoods and its development are phasic forms of migration. I guess those are my thoughts. Like, how do they manage, I suppose, not having any control over what they appear next to? And how does that play out in similar ways with like cities where migration, structural violences of migration are happening? And there's pushback against, I suppose, like how that diversity comes through.
So, okay, I'm going to have to we'll work together to kind of make some of those connections.
Absolutely.
In terms of your first point, that's part of why I think they've struggled on TikTok a little bit, because it's even more of an extreme dynamic of what you've just described of, okay, so we're scrolling through the feed on
Right, yeah.
But TikTok is very like taking stuff out of context and pushing it out there. It doesn't contextualize. TikTok, you're on your FYP the way it works, and it's like some video that someone posted 2 months ago, but you're getting it on your FYP because the algorithm saw that you finished a video about, I don't know, you were watching a video of like a cute puppy being like given a treat, and then it's like, oh, they like treats. So then now this other like influencer posted a thing with like, I don't know, about like a new treat recipe for a homemade treat, and then now you're getting that, but it was too much.
Such a fascinating like rabbit hole dissection of like what the algorithm thinks is baked into the objects of the content. Wow. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, not at all. That was really great. It contextual, right. It's interesting to think about what the algorithm is contextualizing of what you like and what the theme is. Is it about the puppy? Is it about
right.
And it's interesting that that's like the example I use, like why, but yeah, you know, and so yes, totally. But I think the context is decided by the algorithm, but it can actually be very random and like kind of disparate what you're really getting. And so in that sense, the Kardashians, I think, have struggled because I have a lot of complicated thoughts on TikTok, but it's put the power in the people's hands in the sense that they can't curate themselves. And the clips people are usually watching of them or finishing are like some old clip that someone's resurfaced that's not flattering to the Kardashians. And even though they've really survived a lot of like unflattering phases and takes on them, they've pretty much been like hated or resented the whole way through. I feel like TikTok kind of breaks it up in a way where it's not this binary, this mass media binary of you love or you hate the Kardashians. Here's the headline about the like scandalizing thing they've done, or the problematic thing, or the like cool like underdog moment. TikTok is a little bit more fractured. So in terms of, okay, how do we connect that to space? I kind of talked in the video essay about how LA was a place where a lot of people had, all these cities are places where people have a lot of American dream like illusions, and they come and they hope to survive and thrive. And the Kardashians have that narrative kind of in their back pocket, with Robert Sr. being an Armenian descendant of Armenian immigrants. And LA has a lot of, you know, real Armenian community, and they're gentrifying rampant in LA and pretty much every major city. So there is something to that. And the fact that the Kardashians are related to kind of the kind of Mike Davis concept of like the forbidden city, and they are making, you know, fortress homes and really displace so many people in LA. So there's something there for sure.
Yeah, no, and when you were speaking about the TikTok aspect, I think it's really wild that like there's just like there's some kind of inversion going on. I can't really put it into neat terms, but you know, the way that something is designed to create such polarity, right, through the algorithm, like you're either seeing more and more positive things because you interact with positive things, or negative things because you interact with negative things.
Yes.
You're zooming in so intensely that it becomes nuanced almost, because you can't develop a full picture. And so you're like, oh, well, you know, mostly I see positive things about this. So I no longer even have the big picture in mind. So I can be really, really detailed in why I construe my belief in this way. Despite the fact that it's a medium that's meant to really be so anti-gray space.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating, I'm still not going on TikTok, but that is a really fascinating.
Oh, honestly, it's complicated. I think that's a really, there's like a real clear take there in that sense. It's complicated because it will people will descend into the rabbit hole. And so then it's like, to pull yourself out, then you have to kind of pull back using that nuance. You can do deep dives, but then sometimes they're conspiratorial, because TikTok is a space where there's the delight of like making dopamine connections. If you're on like the space of like making takes, which I am, I'm not like, you know, doing dances, I'm doing takes. And so I'm seeing a lot of like that kind of discourse, and people will be tempted because people are just kind of delighted to like learn things, have takeaways, and be entertained as they kind of consume, just passively consume it. You can end up believing in weird stuff, or I found myself as a creator even like making connections that don't feel that intellectually robust, because I know that the audience will like kind of get high, you know, feel the high of it. So it's a fine line between critical thinking and conspiratorial thinking on TikTok, and I'm curious where that's going to go. And it fosters imitation and repetition because of the structure of the app. So that's another thing that it's I think great that you're not on it personally, but it's, you know.
Well, I think it does translate what you're saying. Like, I think the lingo of it is really fascinating. Like, people will be like, oh, I'm on, I don't know, book talk, or I'm on like, there's 15 different terms of like X talk. And that kind of like maps out onto, we had an event yesterday on cities as entryways to intersectional cultures. And we had some professors here give some really fantastic presentations on like ethnic enclaves and folks, both the kind of like violent forces that require kind of entrenchment with your kin, your kind of like socioeconomic, sociocultural kin, but also this like more entrenched tendency to request a space for you and your ilk. And I don't know, the history of that in DC, particularly with Hispanic folks, is really fascinating, because there was no paper trail of the Hispanic presence in DC for like decades and decades at the Smithsonian. So we learned a little bit about that yesterday. That's my little plug for when we send this out. Please do watch. But I think that mapping that kind of like book talk or whatever, there's so many more salacious names that I'm blanking out on, but like mapping that into a kind of singular compressed space is a good segue to thinking about arcology. I did promise that we would speak a little bit about arcology here. So it is Paolo Soleri's planning term. It's a portmanteau of architecture and ecology. And it is drawing on, if you think about cities as I don't know, like composites of density, if you think about them as kind of like heat maps of density, the same way that like a forest or a tide pool or what have you is a compressed space where there's a lot of biodiversity. Like the more biodiversity that you have in this smaller space, the richer the ecosystem will be. Like it's to everyone's benefit. And so Paolo Soleri was kind of thinking about in terms of like, how do we create cities in those images? How do we compress many dwellers into a larger kind of like symbiotic, what he calls a city in the image of man? What I'm thinking about in terms of the media aspect to this, as we were kind of speaking about a little bit beforehand, is like, if lowbrow and pop music if lowbrow entertainment in general, pop music specifically is kind of where I've noticed it most, but like, if lowbrow media is designed literally to grip us, like Justin Bieber makes Changes and it's a fantastic album, and it's designed to be a fantastic pop music album or R&B album, like, and folks still kind of like, I don't know, are ruffle their feathers over like, oh, I know better music. It's like, yes, you know better music, and this is designed to grip us, right?
Yeah.
How are we supposed to accept a city in the image of ourselves if, when we meet that image, when we meet a version of that image, because I'm not going to say that, you know, pop music is like, there's a lot of problems with pop media in general. There's a lot of, like, as we've mentioned, cultural appropriation. There's a lot of erasure. There's a lot of just like narrowing down and oversimplification. But it's an affective register, I would say. That is where I would go to the map, is like, it has this really fantastic blend of you're connecting with it at a level that elides your brain, which is so rare. It's so hard to be able to do that. So if it's got that going on, there must be some form of resonance, right? Like, even though those ideas are sometimes imposed, they are also resonant. So to reiterate, what is an image? How can we even like begin to think about an image that we want to live within in a city if we reject images that feel like they are at some level like emotionally resonant?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll start here because this is what came up for me while we kind of started here.
Yeah.
If we were to say the Kardashians are a city, like they're like they're a family, they're like there's almost a biodiversity within the family system.
Yeah.
Every sister has a little brand, a little thing, a different personality that they kind of bring to the system. Part of what I find interesting about them is that they kind of reflect America in a lot of different, at least, representations and illusions, like through race, class, and gender in problematic, complicated ways. They're a multiracial family, a large blended multiracial family that was at least selling an idea of class mobility to some extent, from like the upper middle class to now the global elite that they are. So there's a lot of resonant stuff, and I think that is why people watch it. And so people don't like that it feels reflective of, if not cultural realities, then cultural anxieties that exist, cultural traumas that exist. Like it's there. Their virality began with the O.J. Simpson trial, which was the beginning of the 24-hour news cycle. There's a lot of like this interplay between the Kardashians as pop culture figures and the masses. And people like to say they're just being, I mean, and they are kind of like non-consensually imposed on us in the sense that they're ubiquitous, but there is an interplay between us and them. And that's where they kind of gain some of their power. Like they are definitely observing the data of how we engage with them and then giving us more based on that. So at the very least, we have to be curious about what we're responding to about them, because that does reflect, it is a mirror to us in that sense. And then it will continue to be sold to us if that's the case. And then the question is, what are we wanting? What are we asking for? And what are we getting based on that interplay? So in terms of building a city, it is the question of, I think, how is it most equitable? How do we deliver that? Because in some sense, we're voting for what we want by what we buy, what we engage with. But that's like still privatized stuff. That's still, like we're buying the albums or we're buying the Spotify and listening to the certain songs, and then it gets continually sold to us. So it's this weird thing of like, we want it. We can't act like we don't want it because it's what we're choosing.
Yeah.
But then also being like institutionally flooded with it. So it's really, really complicated.
Yeah, that I forgot where I was going to go with that.
I mean, we're getting into deep stuff. Yeah, totally.
No. I think like the fact that they are giving us what we say we want kind of makes me that like I was just reminded a little bit of the Excalibur Castle again, because we're maybe like getting what it's hard to say we're getting what we want, because like that gets into kind of ethics of like, well, did we have a choice?
Right.
That's not really the case. But with the Excalibur Castle, what really, I think, as I mentioned, like what really fascinated me about that is like these architects took for granted that such wide audiences would understand what a film castle is, even though at the end of the day, especially with streaming, you might be watching a movie by yourself frequently. And so you only have these really these really sterile statistics to confirm for you that like, no, it's not just you watching this, like hundreds of millions of people are watching this. So like the way that can still, I don't know, the trust baked in there, that like, no, if I say film castle, y'all are going to know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
That's my spatial kind of take on the slippery slope there between our college, but it does, when we think about aspects of equity, I think that's where it gets complicated, because I don't know really anything about how the Kardashians mine data or which demographics they privilege. But it would make you wonder, okay, like if I say, if I somehow indicate to them, first of all, because it's not me talking to them directly, it's me saying like, oh, I like this post.
Yep.
Are they privileging my like more because I'm a white Hispanic? Are they privileging my like more because I'm about to hit some good earning years? Are they like privileging it because I'm in DC? Do they know, like, what else do they, I don't even know if, like, for instance, if Instagram knows like what song I'm playing on Spotify while I'm on Instagram. So like, I don't know what kind of crossover there is there. But this is a good kind of nefarious seedy segue into arcology as like an inverse. So one way of thinking about,
I want to quick stop really fast.
please.
I love that you brought up the Excalibur. I think that helped me understand kind of like the question even more. And that's a great example to this, right? Like people, the Excalibur Casino and Hotel was based on specifically like the design of a Disney castle. And the Disney castles were based on the design of like a real castle that exists somewhere in Europe. I'm pretty sure there's like a name. I have it in my book. I'm going to see if I can like talk and like casually like, if I can't, I have it like right here. It's a great book, everybody. The Strip, Las Vegas and the Architecture of the American Dream by Stefan Al, who was interviewed in the video essay and like was one of the first academics to truly be nice to me. So I really appreciate it forever.
That's such important. I'll drop the link to the video essay in the chat also as well.
Great dude and like really great. This book is amazing. So basically, if I can like just like flip through, the traditional architects, classical architects were not about the Excalibur. Love it. People love it. When you go to Vegas, it's like one of the first things you notice. You're like, what is that? Like it looks really, it's nice to the eye. It really stands out. And I think it stands out more than like a classic looking real like detailed depiction of a castle. And it reflects America in the sense that we live in a society of reproduction. So what is familiar to us and comfortable for us is the exaggerated details, like the cartoonish details, the Disney like archetype, like in our visual experience. But it's fun. I couldn't wait to go there and feel like I was in like a movie castle when I went. And the thing about it that's also interesting is, I don't know if this has changed. I actually do need to do a deeper study here of Vegas to know, but my partner who grew up going to Vegas said like Excalibur was kind of marketed more and more financially accessible for like the working class visitors of Vegas. So there's also that experience of there's the darkness of the fact that it's like just reproduction after reproduction after reproduction to a point of caricature. But the fact is like it represents a better and more accessible experience for a lot of people. And it's like a really cool castle and casino, like, and it's a place that her family stayed. And it's a place of good memories for people that want to have a great time in Vegas and have their main character moment, to bring it all back to the main character moment. Yes, here it is. It was a castle within a castle scheme. And here's something that you guys will find interesting. They use data. So Circus Enterprises are the ones that like made this castle. They by then had established a professional marketing department, and they plowed through demographic data, psychological profiles, and market research, and realized 7 million Americans went to Renaissance fairs in 1989. So
Renaissance fairs.
Right. That was the
What a deep cut. Okay. Wow.
Yeah, they're like, the people want castles. And they based it on Disney. And okay, I won't waste our time, but like
no, that's
great. Isn't that interesting though? I just thought that was really
because it's kind of like it's a palpable or like material, tangible, what have you, version of what we were saying about TikTok. Is like these folks plowed through Renaissance fair of all things, like it, because what if Renaissance fairs just happened to be a thing because like it was, I don't know, cheaper relative to other movies that were released at that time, or like maybe just like the weather was nice, like all these really arbitrary factors that then get cemented into like, no, now we're going to build a whole ass casino and hotel because of these like totally are like arbitrary, like irrelevant data points.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And now it's like this experience. And like Vegas as a city is kind of like this interesting, the construction of Vegas, there's a ton of money. There was a ton of corporate money in it. It also has a history of like, obviously it's mafia mythology, which is very real. It also is a union city. There's a strong union presence in Vegas, and it's just, you know, the hospitality that like drives the city. They're unionized. And early in the building of Vegas, it was also made with union money. Like there were people, like, so in a way you could say like the people kind of built the foundations of Vegas, and then it was built upon and kind of like reappropriated in some ways and colonized in some ways, but it's still this like kind of like ever flowing, like it's there's a reason it feels like people go, because it feels like it reflects them and reflects America.
It makes me think of OnlyFans,
Yes.
because of kind of like how sex workers built the platform and then were kicked off of it.
Yeah.
And now we're kind of like somewhat back on, somewhat back off. Rachel Dolezal is on OnlyFans. If y'all didn't know, hilarious.
Yes.
But this is a great segue actually to thinking about like, because one way of thinking about arcology is a method of indigenous agriculture called Three Sisters planting. So you've got beans, squash, and corn, all the same tiny plot again, but like they're all in the same crop, so that they co-fertilize each other, and like the beanstalk and the corn stalk provide kind of like support for the squash flower. It's beautiful. It's really beautiful. It's very cool to think about. Weird inversion when we consider the datafication of our lives is like places like Amazon warehouses, using aggregates of data, making algorithms that we have jack shit say in, and like total guesswork. Because like I think like the thing with not only Amazon but in general, like there is this kind of grimy, like we're feeding into the algorithm, we're making it profitable for them, but they like consistently change what actually is profitable. They're like, no, actually liking stuff doesn't matter now. It's like, but you told us that it mattered, and now it's no longer mattering. So like it's
fascinating.
weird.
Fascinating and terrifying. That reference the web series again that my sister and I made. We interviewed Sammy Sage, who is a co-founder of like one of those massive meme accounts, Betches, that you kind of see if you're scrolling through. And I kind of already knew this intuitively, but she kind of confirmed it as someone that just like knows media and like the whole like the real like hierarchy of it. Like people will lose jobs like en masse when Facebook decides to change its algorithm.
Yes.
And so there'll be like a company will have an initiative, like we're hiring people to like make videos because videos are the new thing, these specific kind of videos with this specific kind of timestamp timeline. And then it's like they shift it and then it's just gone. So the unpredictability and the keeping us on our toes, and like really like it's the stakes of it are really terrible, terrifying to think about, and like fascinating and still mystifying. We still don't even, this is how we live. It generates how we all live, but we don't really know how it entirely works still. And Vegas is a city, and the Kardashians, I think, are like a force that rely so much on data. We also learned in the video essay that slot machines are algorithms, and obviously gambling is like the real undercurrent that drives Vegas. And they were starting the system. I guess the guy that like created DARPA like went to Vegas after he went and made DARPA, and like established the first network of connectivity through Vegas to keep people at slot machines.
So wild. Yeah.
The Kardashians,
the rewards card aspect of that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. For some reason this makes me think of Starbucks, because not so much the union aspect of that, we could definitely get into that, but I recently learned that I don't know if y'all are on Starbucks rewards. Starbucks Pete's is where the good coffee is, Starbucks is where the better rewards is. So I'm like I have learned that when it gives me an offer for like, I don't know, get a latte today, specifically today, and you'll get, I don't know, like 50 bonus stars, whatever. They have a deep learning, I think their AI is called like Deep Brew or something, and it decides based on which stores you frequent and knowing how slammed or how relatively not slammed those stores are, it'll reward you with a drink that is either more or less complicated to make. Which is, when we think about, that's one aspect. And then we think about like those stores are, to bring back the union aspect into this, I was listening to a podcast with one of the organizers in the Buffalo store, if I'm not mistaken. And she was saying that, you know, she had like assurances from her manager that she was not going to lose her job. She was not going to, the store was fine. And then like two weeks later, it's like, actually this store is going to close. So we're going to move you to a store that's like, I don't know how many miles farther. And it's like, this person doesn't drive, right? So then you're thinking about moving to a store means a more expensive Uber drive, means either that, or if you are in a city that is well connected, there's maybe a bus route. But then if we integrate the pandemic into this, DC for several months had to slash its bus routes because literally its bus driver fleet, everyone had COVID.
Oh my
everyone
God.
had COVID. So I don't, those are those like three coexisting, like cooperative parts there. I don't know how Las Vegas maybe tracks with that too.
Yeah, no, that is really interesting. Yeah, I'd have to learn more about Vegas and kind of like the connectivity of it, the transportation of it.
Yeah.
I don't know much. Did we learn about this in this book? This book was like my Bible through this process about the transportation in Vegas. Towards the end, I think he talks about how the construction of the sidewalks was kind of determined by the corporatization of Vegas because people were kind of out walking, looking more. So like that did determine
Interesting.
build out of sidewalks and making it more walkable. But I don't believe Vegas really has like a public transit besides like just like the kind of clogged up main streets that exist in the strip and then kind of going outwards. But it would be very interesting to learn more. This is like a prompt for me to think about that and the fact that it's definitely a union city in a lot of ways and how people were getting around. I mean, even the fact that it was kind of just plopped in the desert, the way that started is interesting. Like it's like this massive now development just kind of like en route, and it was supposed to be a place that truck drivers could stop and like chill. So it's so interesting to think about that.
That's a real spatialization of that kind of like working class again.
Yes.
That which you would want to maybe think is benevolent, but it's not, right? Because at the end of the day, it's about like, no, if you'll stop here, you'll engage in these really high capital garnering kind of activities. And so then it becomes a question to bring it back to this reflection of like the lowbrow as the every person, right? Like, is it a reflection of us, or is it like the components that they decide are profitable, that they decide enough people are engaging in for it to become profitable? And especially when you think about like the Kardashians as they're human beings at the end of the day. So it's like, how much of that are they saying, okay, I see that this data point is most profitable, but like this second kind of maybe 90% equally profitable bit, I like a lot more and I feel more capable of doing. So I'm going to more so engage in those. We've also kind of been touching on surveillance capitalism throughout this last little sector. And I wanted to bring us this theme of homemaking, because in the video essay, you discuss their homes as like these fortresses, these like security theater fortresses. Do you want to just like go over that briefly?
Yeah. So another shout out to my partner. She's like my muse, I swear to God. She introduced me to Mike Davis because she's got a passion for LA. She's from LA. She like loves, she introduced me to Vegas too, and like how to see it in a new way. And he wrote about how LA is becoming a fortress city and it's becoming militarized. There's, such funding for the police in terms of like literally like military capabilities, but a real dismissal of public housing, like, you know, the real like human rights crises happening on the streets in LA. And it's becoming so outsized. It's becoming such a binary that it's like a real crisis of poverty. And then it's going beyond the rich kind of dominating the spaces, but like the like massively rich. So like $1 million mansion is being knocked down for like a $30 million mansion. And the rich are like kind of militarizing their homes, like really like high tech surveillance systems, and then the protection of the police. So the Kardashians, there was just one moment where Khloe is describing her home. She's talking about how weird it's going to be to leave her first home that she bought and moved into herself.
I remember that. Yeah, she's like in a closet, right, or something.
Yeah. Her like massive closet, and she was like, I made this fortress, and it's going to be weird to leave it. And it was interesting. She called it a fortress, and my partner was the one that was like, oh, Mike Davis, Fortress City. And so it's like the case where it's not even the Kardashians as people that are so important to me as these figures. It's like, okay, it's a jumping off point to like looking at a phenomenon, and they provide a useful jumping off point in that way. So that's another factor for sure. And they kind of normalize that, you know, they glorify it. They like send those messages outwards for sure. Because it feels like, oh, who wouldn't want a fortress in their home? And there's that aspirational experience. Even if you hate the Kardashians or whatever your thing is, there's still a thing of like, right, I aspire to cultivate enough security that my home can feel like, maybe I hate Khloe Kardashian. I don't personally, but maybe, you know, I feel this way, but like, I want that. There's still that I want that thing that they kind of do institutionalize for us.
That's really the way that they can be a conduit.
Yes.
That is simultaneously like so hyper visible, like because the in is Khloe or Kylie or whoever, but they're also like not self-effacing, but like kind of making extension, like they become invisible at the end of that, despite that kind of hyper visibility. And it, you know, the aspect of folks wanting this kind of like hyper secure fortress that they might call their own does make me think too about gentrification, in the sense of like the impulse to guard your home, in that, not necessarily like that militarized sense, because it doesn't necessarily have to reach that far, but kind of the impulse to protect your home from becoming someone else's, or becoming the next big bar or whatever. Like it's your home has wrongfully been construed as for everyone, and then wherever you decide to move next will eventually, this is the story kind of that we learned yesterday about Hispanic presence in DC. Like they start off in this one neighborhood called Adams Morgan, and then they are pushed up north a little bit more and more into like this place called Columbia Heights. And it's like, I don't know, just the idea that like your home can be so fluid in that way, in a really kind of like despicable way.
Yeah, and that is where we can see that in pop culture too. I think there's like there's the argument for it's like both, and, you know, like, so pop culture can be so useful to us. It can reflect the masses and what people are kind of like engaging with, but there also is such institutional power and like the true pop culture, that's where the appropriation comes in, where it's like, I'm going to just take this and like make it my music, like whatever aesthetic, or all the things the Kardashians do. So they're kind of just taking so casually the access to it, the sense that the door's open to do it, is a real phenomenon. And to your point earlier too, about how they are these conduits for these ideas, but then they kind of, or a lot of people won't say that they're the inspo, or like they won't even, like, it's just more like the message comes through. That is an interesting thing. We made sure we wanted it for, it's even also weirdly makes the point too, doing this video essay about these kind of very like conceptual ideas. We wanted to make sure we talk to people out and about in different cities.
I loved that. I was like, imagine just like planning a whole vacation for yourself and then accidentally also making an essay. Like incredible.
It was really fun. That's the thing. It was fun production wise. I love the excuse to talk to people. And it's fun for viewers. I think people like it just grabs the eye and they want to see what people have to say and like see themselves in that and like connect. And so that was really fun to interview academics and then interview people and kind of have the essay be that like bridge. And there was one group we talked to, I forgot how much of it my sister included in the edit, but this guy was talking about how his cousins liked the Kardashians. He said he hated the Kardashians. It was very kind of gendered actually. And I was kind of like, what do you, he's like, I hate Kim Kardashian, but I love Kanye West. I was like, what do you like about Kanye? And everything he listed, all the values that Kanye represented to him were actually not that different than what Kim also does in terms of like, American dream, like the grit, the determination, the like capitalism. And it was really interesting that like the values come through still. They're still being sold to us. They're still like, you know, in pop culture being consumed, but then like there's like a gender piece of like this is acceptable to me, but this message, like the way the conduit, if the conduit doesn't appeal, we'll just like ignore it or it'll phase back, but like the messaging is still there. It's still consistent between these pop figures. I don't know, it's interesting somehow.
It does make me think if there's a kind of not a blueprint necessarily, but like almost enough check boxes that you have to kind of like tick off to be at a certain level of visibility, which is it feels a little kind of slimy to think about it like that. Just to think about at the end of the day, like people concocting their performance in that way too. And then to think also about like, what are those boxes? Why are those boxes the ones that, because that gets us back to this idea of choice, right? Like, is this an image that we are choosing, or is this an image that is so like Bisquick, you know what I mean? Like it's so kind of just like we're not even thinking about it. I was listening to, I think it was like the Daily the other day, and the guest speaker was like, yeah, historically asking voters to think about two-step plans doesn't work out. Like they want the immediate. They want like, so if you ask them, pay higher gas prices now so that we don't have to drill on public lands for oil reserves, so that, you know, by 2030 we're on par with where we need to be so that like our planet doesn't burst into flames. They're like, but I don't want to pay $5 a gallon. And how much of that is like, okay, but you fed them this idea that I don't really like that terminology, but like you've imposed on them this idea that like you only have to think in one step at a time, or that you only have to think about one crisis at a time, or that you only have to think about these things in the context that they're situated in, and never as cooperative.
Yeah, and I feel like that's where we can get back to thinking about mediation and like the reason that's kind of being imposed. Although I do understand, I know it sounds, there's a problematic tinge to it, but the idea of being fed it, because there is the kind of, that's why we call it pop culture consumption. Like there is an experience of like, it is kind of like imposed, but that's my whole thing is trying to help people like realize they can consume more actively, at least, you know, if it's being thrown at us like this. But mediation, like media is, it does simplify stuff like this. Back to the Excalibur Castle, like it's so visually appealing, it's fun. I wanted to go hang out there when I went to Vegas, but the idea is that it like gives that like very broad experience. And so I think media kind of like has this way of like simplifying stuff and then telling us what the narrative is, and then it's hard to question that. Like it's hard to know to like question that. And there was something else I was going to say to that point too. It might come to me. I don't know.
It'll probably, I think this is also getting us into kind of the Berger quote that we were talking about earlier. There's, to paraphrase, it's the idea that like what someone has learned substantively, I think the areas you mentioned were like poetry, history, math, all these really things. You shouldn't be able to understand that when it's a caricature of culture. It should only be the kind of like half-life of the atom, so to speak. It should only be about that like simulacra relationship, which reminds me of basically the Kardashians' trajectory. Like no one is thinking about Dash the boutique when they think about which is wild to me because I'm still embarrassed about shit that I did like 3 years ago. And it's like, oh, to live in a world where like you don't even remember what you did yesterday, right? Like, and I don't know, is that what draws people to the Kardashians? The fact that they are these like posts of now, like an indefinite now.
Yeah, I think that's where when people say casually the Kardashians are masters of narrative, we've kind of come to even take that for granted, but that's exactly what it is. They kind of like paint in broad stripes, even though the weird thing is Dash is very documented. I mean, they were doing that as their back, yeah, like for seasons. Yeah. And that's where TikTok could be their foil because it's going to spit out like a video from like a moment in 2012 and it's going to be like here and that's what I mean when I was saying it like fractures this like bigger sweep that they've kind of gotten comfortable with somehow. I don't know if like enough tiny clips from like TikTok are going to be enough to like burst what they've made at this point, especially because they're billionaires and they really like have mastered media at this point, but it is giving them like a little, it's whatever, it's there's like little undermining moments each time it happens in a different way with Gen Z. But yeah, the fact that they're very in the present and always looking forward, but they do reach to the past to co-opt imagery of the past that's convenient for them, and that's not unique to them, that's a publicity thing. Like, so to really bring it full circle to our conversation, we'll get to the nostalgia part of publicity and how that feeds to make character moments, you know, like John Berger wrote about in Ways of Seeing how, and he wrote Ways of Seeing in the 70s, and he was noticing that 1970s advertising used oil painting imageries. So like
I did my thesis on advertising, so this is
good,
even bigger full circle. Wow. Okay.
So far, it's so much fun. It's, and you notice it. The crazy thing about it is he was noticing this and critiquing capitalism in the 70s. The principles in the book, maybe the examples are a little different.
Yeah.
I would argue we still see oil painting imagery in today's advertising. But the principles are the same of like just these kind of like, as he put it, what people have half learned in school are alive in advertising, and that's all that matters. So like he was saying like, you know, I forgot the exact examples he used, but the examples I kind of claimed were like the fact that we see, you know, a big pyramid in Las Vegas and it feels like kind of like mystical and intriguing and like historic because it's a pyramid, or when Kim Kardashian was selling a perfume bottle that looked like her bust and it looks very ancient and like Grecian or whatever, or Roman.
And also the whole like fable, or not the fable, but the I don't know, the urban lore kind of currency that the Venus de Milo's like missing arm. Yeah,
exactly. Yes, that's a really good. Yeah, I'm sure you guys can know what we're thinking of. Yeah, I know. I'm thinking of the same perfume bottle. Yes, they do stuff like that all the time. They had some kind of like Greek goddess kind of styled Skims campaign, or maybe it was Kylie's makeup. But they really lean into that John Berger idea of nostalgia as publicity. And it's not, they just do it really well, but it's really like what a lot of publicity does. What else did he say? People drinking, people in the oil painting sense on a horse, but then that can mean on a motorcycle, on a car, just posing on vehicles, modes of transportation. Fascinating stuff.
That's the Kanye West song, Bound.
Yes.
Bound too. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. And that was like a real like innovative take on it with like the very memorable, like she's straddling him and it's like this like amazing internet art reference, for sure. And then I think sometimes when we're having our main character moments, I'm like feeling like I don't know, like a hot lady like in Vegas going into like some like very like, you know, novel like hotel, like going into Caesars. We get to have our moments using some of that imagery, seeing ourselves in the context of some of that imagery, I think.
Yeah. I was really fascinated, like the kind of I think you interviewed a couple folks who were kind of in Vegas specifically for that kind of like ego death, you know, like, so let me come here, let me shed myself, but like not even shed myself because I want to shed myself, but shed myself so that I can occupy a costume Like there is this kind of implicit transaction that needs to occur. Like
Yep.
you can't have this costume with any trace elements of yourself. It has to be like all or nothing almost.
Yes. And what's so interesting, and it's so funny you mentioned the word blueprint earlier, because I'm actually working on a chapter about the Kardashians as blueprints, and are they blueprints like of icons or not, and this whole question of that.
Oh, yeah.
It's really interesting. And the example I'm using is Kim Kardashian's Halloween costumes, and the fact that it's like a thing. The Kardashians like go all out with their Halloween costumes, and they're always referencing icons. And there's this like, I mean, that's what Halloween's all about, but the way they like curate it for social media, and then that has its influence, like it's kind of like this thing of like you can, and then as a result on Instagram, there's a lot of people trying to look like Kim Kardashian or accidentally looking like Kim Kardashian. So this idea of like becoming and like the malleability of becoming, and it's almost like the Kardashians make the space, and pop culture can make a space on social media that's like the same playground vibe that Vegas has, where it's like you can be who you want to be, like using optics, using aesthetics, like, and you just have to shed it. You can shed it and you can do it.
Yeah. But then it makes you question the interiority of that, because it's like you can occupy that costume. My friend and I have this kind of like ongoing conversation about phantoms, this idea that like people, if they want to say, if like many people at GW, for instance, are really taken with the idea of being politicians or being on the Hill or whatever. And it's like, but they don't really care about the content of what goes into being a politician. They want the costume. They want the ability to say, I am a politician.
Right. Which is to say I have power.
True. And but like, do any of those other costumes have power, or is it just kind of the politician aspect?
Yeah, for sure. That's really interesting. I haven't been to DC in so long, but I mean, this conversation is really like reminding me like of course the nature of like the main industries there are going to influence the sense of culture there, and like what that's like in the surveillance. I didn't even know. It makes sense that DC is one of the most surveilled cities, or the most surveilled city. I had no idea.
Yeah,
formally at least, or like officially.
I think that's kind of the word that's on the street, and I tend to buy it, considering like there's about 5 or 10 different variations of the police force. So,
right.
But y'all all have the same violent job, and it's just different names.
Wow.
Yeah, which is also like it weirdly, it's kind of resonant with the idea of like icons, because it's a trafficking in a similar function. What that function is, it remains up for debate, I guess, but like it's trafficking this similar function within different costumes, to go back to your interviewee who like he liked Kanye but he disliked Kim.
Yes, absolutely. It's the same, same system, but like different like projection.
Yeah. This actually does tie back, and I know we're already at 4:20. I don't want to keep you too long, but like I'm having so much fun. This does tie back again with this theme of homemaking. I know this sounds like a stretch, but hear me out. Because what we've been talking about is kind of like people wanting these personas, I suppose. And again, this comes back to a rejection of an every person ideal that lowbrow tends to give us. Like, I don't know, I think of home as synonymous with where you are like unself-conscious, you're writing your best work because no one is watching you. Like, I'm not the kind of person that can go to a cafe and bang out a good essay. Like, I got to be greasy in my sweatpants. It's got to be a nightmare because I'm unwitnessed. And so it's all just here to here.
Yeah.
And so if lowbrow or pop music has this kind of like, if it's the home, if it's the sweatpants of media, what can we kind of, we've come to variations of this question, but like, what can we extrapolate about the disdain for that more, that interiority that we were saying, that interiority that's inescapable from when you're in that costume? what can we extrapolate about the disdain for that interiority? Because it's like, if the lowbrow is the sweatpants and we reject the sweatpants, even though the sweatpants is our core self, like what's the impulse for wanting to live in the city image, the constructed icon image?
Oh my gosh, it's really interesting. I have to ponder it more. That's like a,
yeah, there was like 5 different things going on there. I'm sorry.
it's interesting. It's like an equation. It's an equation. Kind of.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. I mean, we can start, I guess, by like looking at how people react in terms of trying to legitimize pop culture or bring it.
And I'm someone who does that too. I'm like, I love this pop album. I will give you these pop songs, but I'll be very deliberate in telling you, like, this cannot be your only media consumption. Please do not walk away from me with just this Charlie XCX song. Please also take like a deep cut from the 70s and like 2 other kind of like Earl songs, you know? So guilty as charged.
Totally. Earl. Yeah, I love Earl. Yes, I found myself actually over time approaching people for different interviews with these different projects, being like, giving my card after we chat and being like, I'm not a Kardashian fan account though. It's not a fan account. And I'm like, why do I do that? I do it a little bit on a practical sense because people will turn off so fast. But it's not, it's this feeling of like, that's a practical reason why I do it, but I do want to question, like, why is there an ego part of it too, you know? But yeah, people do want to judge. I get the comments that are like, and it's hard because I also do sometimes feel that pop culture can be a distraction. And I do feel critical of how it's all mediated, you know, but it's also like, let people have their fun, let people go to Excalibur and like feel like they're in a Disney movie, you know? So this is a toughie. This is tough. I have to think more about it, really.
Yeah. I guess what you're mentioning about the cards is like, it's weird because it touches on the interiority aspect in a self-reflexive way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like the way that we can't escape the fact that by virtue of the fact that we are engaging in it, that's telling us something about our interiority. And I don't know if there's a way that maps onto cities or, you know, Las Vegas, LA, or New York or anything like that. You did mention, I think in the video essay, like New York is the main character. So I don't know if there's anything spatial about that, but
yeah, spatial. Yeah, okay, like being within yourself or kind of taking it out. One thing I was thinking is sort of like the construction of this, how we identify with the cities that we're in, the spaces we're in. I know a lot of people that are locals of Vegas have a lot of Vegas pride, you know. There's something about like the fact that like I do this like intellectual work, intellectualizing the Kardashians, but really deep down to my core, I trust my distance from them. Like I trust that they're in my interiority. And I know because I have different goals than Kim Kardashian. But from the outside, some people don't trust that, like, because like ethnically we're kind of similar. I'm half Middle Eastern, like I'm putting work into this account. Like I do have a thing about grit and hard work sometimes. And hopefully I check my privilege more and it's not so problematic. I don't know, but like I try, but like I know that there's points of identification, but like I feel the boundary, I trust the boundaries within my like soul. But like it's like how do you externalize that and share it with your audience so that they trust it too, and then it's a performance.
Yeah.
You know? And as it grows, my account, my project, it's like weirder because it's like this onus to like clarify that, but I don't know how, because I just know it in myself. I don't know. There is an interiority thing there, but that's not quite the spatial conversation.
No, I think when you bring in the element of trust, that's how it becomes the spatial aspect, because like cities, as I kind of started off by saying, like cities are materialized versions of principles, and those principles are structured around like white supremacy. And for so many people to believe in white supremacy, to like really fully believe it, is an affective sensation. It's a sensation of trust.
Yeah.
So I definitely see that through line.
Yeah. To like actualize it, that it requires that participation and that like co-signing in a way.
Yes. Yeah. It's also reminding me a little bit, there's an article that I was assigned last semester for a geography class, by Mitchell. It's on, it's called Dead Labor. It's California Living, California Dying. And basically he proposes that like some landscapes have value because they are not other landscapes. Again, to bring us into a different, into the spatial aspect of things, like let's say like the drivability of LA, the kind of like distance, the freeway network can either be a positive if you think that walkability is like gross and not for me or whatever, or it can be negative if you're someone like me and who walks everywhere and you're like, well, that sounds wild, I don't want to spend like half an hour in traffic every day. So like the value is not fixed in space. It's only when you consider that space in relation to other spaces that you know exist, but that are in your head, like that Excalibur castle. Like they're only the I don't know, configurings that you think or expect that they should be.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Theory feels so like there's like this way of trying to understand our world and like express it and like put it to and find a language for it can be very poetic.
Yes. That's the hope.
Yeah.
I will wrap us up with one final question. I'm not sure if there's any in the chat as well. I cannot look at the chat while I am speaking, but I will take a look. But I'll wrap us up with a final question on kind of like, I don't know, what can we take away knowing, I've asked variations of this, but I want to kind of ask it in a more like streamlined sense. Like if we know that there's a disdain for this, not even the success of the Kardashians, but the popularity of it. If we know that there's disdain for people that have this like probably very gendered idea of like, oh, they're only popular because they're like trifling, whatever. Or they're only popular because they're selling like makeup or kind of stuff that is women's interest. But if there's this disdain for like the fact that at some level, like watching people be in a family is lowbrow because it is every day, because like we exist in families that we also, you know, have our tiffs with or what have you. Like if there is that disdain, like how can we I think this is what your project gets at a lot, is like by inspecting it, you're giving it this validity that it's not so simple.
Yeah.
What if it was that simple? Like what if we could kind of like radically accept that it was that simple? Because if we can do that, can we maybe apply that as a principle of equity that informs our cities?
Wow, that's really interesting. I mean, yeah, so I think you're hitting on something that this actually might help me answer your last question too. Jean Baudrillard's idea of reality TV is basically like the power of it and like the weirdness of it is that we're watching it, but it's watching us. It's watching us because like the first reality show, An American Family, which depicted they're called the Loud family. It really was just like following this family, and there is still the element of performance, and the cameras create a whole different dynamic. But we're watching a family be a family on TV, and we're doing that from our homes. And so it's like this panopticon kind of in a weird way, like of just mutual watching as a conceptual idea, at least.
And then watching your family through that lens. Yeah.
Like looking at your family and being like, oh, like this is the Chloe, this is the mediator, whatever it would be.
Or even that kind of like office look, you know what I mean? Like the staring into the camera that people have taken, like the way that you watch a TV show and then you step away from it and your life is curated in that same aesthetic.
Main character moment again. Exactly. Yeah, it's back to that. And yeah, and there's something about And I think that is a face level value that people do like about the show, because that's a thing that I see with people who are so conflicted about their engagement with the Kardashians. For their love or hate them, like they do engage, like they are charming in some ways as a family. They make fun of each other. They're cozy. They just like flop around, and like, at least when they weren't so curated, when they were like a true reality show.
Yeah.
Now they're a reality show about a reality show.
Right.
You know, but so that face value experience of them, we can take and try to like learn from or take from. I will say, like, I tend to focus on the mediation of the show and the data and the algorithms and all of that. But it is true that there was a time when I first started watching, I was watching for the postmodern experience of it, but there was still a part of me that was watching as a viewer.
Yeah.
And the curiosity was like, my sister hadn't yet moved in. I'm pretty sure my best friend was moving out to like move to a new city. My partner at the time had moved to California for law school. Like, there was a lot changing in my life, and there was something comforting about watching that show. And I do think one thing they do on the narrative level is they model communication actually quite well, like, because they have to build episodes around communication. So it's like, we just had this fight about this, I don't know, perfume sales problem, because now it's still a product placement. It's all still an ad for like Kim's new perfume, but we had a fight. Now we are going to have a scene where we come together and we say, how did you feel about that? I was kind of coming from this. So I do think there's a usefulness actually to some of the stuff that they value when they invest in their good family values narratives that they use to throw people off and make it harder for people to critique them. And they probably also have some of that unity, because there's no way they could have been so successful if they didn't have a core like mafia like family unity too. So there are things we can take and appropriate for ourselves too, for sure. I just don't emphasize that much, because it's really hard for people to handle it when I'm like, there's things we can take and use, or there are like valuable things in their narratives. That's hard for people, and then I have to like be like, don't worry, I'm still critical of them though. Like, it's that balance, that synthesis that's interesting to create. That was
no, I mean, that's the disdain, kind of like the knee jerk. Yeah.
Right. That's true. Like, to kind of point to like any takeaway that you can get from it, it scares people, and there's anger a lot of the time.
Yeah, the anger is fascinating. It's like, I get on the one hand that it's like, you know, none of us chose this.
Yeah.
On the other hand, like, none of us chose anything. So it's I don't know if maybe all of the anger of like the arbitrary nihilistic point of existence, like that the existentialism aspect gets like funneled into our media in some way, maybe.
Absolutely. It's really, and it's like, I want to say this in a way that doesn't come off as a defense of them. And it's another moment of my partner being my muse. So shout out to her. She wouldn't even like need this much credit, but I feel the need to like make sure.
No. Oh my God. We love collaboration. We love, you know, the non-scarcity of genius.
Yes. I like
Toni Morrison. Yes.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. So shout out to her. She's at work right now. She left in the middle of this convo, but when the Kendall tequila thing happened, that was really problematic. My partner is Mexican, and she was kind of like, why is everyone so mad about this when they're not mad about all the white tequila colonization of like agave fields? Like, and you know what I mean? So she wasn't pro Kendall. She doesn't care about the Kardashians, but she was kind of like, oh, it's funny that people are mad now. Like, I'm not okay with any of it, but like, let's keep the conversation going. Are we? And then no one did. So there's something interesting about that to me a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, like, not to bring it back to the kind of like performative anger of white folks at the Oscars thing, but it is wild. Like, I'm gonna pull up a screenshot. I'm gonna pull up a receipt. Not a receipt, that's a negative connotation, but I follow this really great thinker on Instagram. Her is @BabyWuSI.
Okay.
She's doing a lot of like kind of work on or like the things that drew me to her is like the way that she's speaking about like colonization as a project, not always so racialized. Like, it can be you can have through the lens of Ukraine, I guess it's kind of like throwing people off that like there can be subjugation of folks who are also not necessarily racialized, but that's also a very bad paraphrasing. Y'all should follow her, but
I'm intrigued. I'm gonna go look for sure.
yeah. But she had a kind of yes, a few weeks or like April 14th. I find it so deeply ironic that 2 weeks after the Oscar slap, after white people spent the subsequent days braying about the horrors of witnessing that kind of violence, there is yet another circulated body cam video of a Black person murdered by the police that the very same white people undoubtedly had to circulate and witness. That interracial conflict between two rich Black people was beyond the pale of witnessing, but somehow this state-created snuff footage was necessary viewing. Like, reminds me of kind of the whole aspect of like you're only upset about the like very, very final outpost and not everything else that went into it.
Well said. Yeah, that's exactly, yes, exactly. And so the hope is to kind of use that kind of the pop culture representation to go deeper and like really aggregate it. And that's, I kind of want to like show people the ways they can think about it, the constructs of how to do that. And then almost like, because sometimes people are like, what's your take? I don't even want my space to be a space of takes. I want to like show them how, and then like them for people to create theirs. You know what I mean? But it's like, so part of me wants to sit, be like, here's an example, but I almost don't want to guide that much either. But like, I think the Kindle Tequila thing, I might write a long form thing at some point about that to kind of just challenge people to like stay with it longer.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Because the anger, it almost in a sense, like it becomes this thing of like, hate the Kardashians, that's my thing, I am good because I hate them, and then we stop there. And then if the anger becomes a distraction, I think that's like, not ideal. It means that, I don't know, media is working at manipulating our emotions and like almost paralyzing us. But now I'm going to get into my whole media theory like rant, so never mind, I'll just stop here.
No. You know what, that's our second conversation.
Yes.
If I'm just perusing the chat, there's questions that folks asked, but otherwise, let's see. Oh yes, Zoe Samudzi. Thank you, Sella. So follow at GWUSI. That's the landing point.
Cool.
This has been remarkable.
Oh yeah, I had a blast.
I am truly so chuffed. I can't wait to listen back to this and kind of like take some notes and try and do some writing and some new deeper thinking. I did want to mention one last kind of like quotation citation, because my thesis was on advertising. I drew from, I think, one of your posts like a year ago, almost like a McLuhan deep dive.
Oh my gosh.
And so I grabbed a McLuhan book from the library and was like, advertising, I kind of I keep thinking about it, like advertising put into any other context is hilarious. And it's I wonder if there's any way that like a parting thought here might be like for folks to think about, like if the Kardashians were in any other context, would it be hilarious? Would it be like angering? Would it be soothing? I don't know, like any other context. But then that makes you think about what context you're taking them in the first place for there to be another context. Yeah.
I think about what we're gonna to speak to like kind of the anger piece too. I think about how we're gonna look back on them and we're gonna be able to see the impact they had, the damages that they've done, the things they represented, but it won't be like, it'll be more, there'll be distance. And so I'm kind of trying to get us there now in a way. But yeah, that very well could be. And they lean into the absurdity of their kind of comedy, because they do have a sense of humor in the show, and that is what grabs people sometimes.
Sure.
I sometimes feel like the comedy of what they do is a self-awareness that they're hilarious advertising out of context. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
That's clicking for me in this moment right now. And I'm glad you brought up McLuhan, because when I was kind of like anticipating this convo, I was kind of thinking, okay, so I'm not an urban studies like academic. But I do like to think about McLuhan's ideas and how he called the internet, or the future internet, media a global village, because that's a spatial kind of way of looking at how we're living, and it's really true.
Yeah, I think in the video essay, I remember there was like the Kardashians as like the capital city of that global village or something.
Yes.
Which mind-boggling that people could be a city, right? Arcology, city and the people. City and the people is the symposium. Arcology is city in the image of man. The Kardashians are their own entities, their physical entity. It's I hope y'all are confused, right? I hope y'all are confused, because more to chew on.
Yeah.
Yeah, any concluding remarks? Shall we
I feel great. I've had that great feeling after a generative conversation, and I haven't had one in a while. So I really enjoy those. I thrive on those. So thank you for having me. Thank you all for being here who have been here. And I feel really lucky. Thank you for this. Great time.
Truly, thank you. I feel truly like, wow, you can dream things and they actually, if you try and live in their spirit, it comes true, which is just like kind of the ethos of this org in the sort of like social, socioeconomic, like justice aspect.